My apologies, all. I'm having some technical difficulties. I'll be right back. Okay, I think I got it figured out. My apologies for that. What's going on, everybody? FYB presents Wise Word Wednesdays, a quick live stream to help you get closer to accomplishing your dreams. I'm your host, Joe Spide, and I do represent the fresh. I apologize for the technical difficulties that I was going through in the beginning. Got it all figured out. But anyway, yes, we're here. I'm excited. Got a great show for you all today. I wanted to make sure I started off with the hat forward so you can see I'm rocking the PLP hat, the Peace, Love, and Positivity hat. Shout out to the PLP brand, man. My guy Dev hooked it up. I asked him a special request because these hats you cannot find anywhere else. I asked him for a special request and bro hooked it up. So mad love and appreciation for that. So that's why I wanted to start it off with the hat in the front. So I might switch it, to the hat in the back. But for now, this is what we rocking and it's cool. But I have a dope episode for y'all today. I appreciate y'all. Again, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Wise Word Wednesday YouTube channel. It's a great opportunity to get notifications of all the stuff that we have going on, where I bring in a variety of different guests. We have some good conversations, and that's what this whole thing is about in the first place. Hit the like button if you haven't already done so. When you hit the like button, it allows, YouTube's algorithm to show that this is an important page. It's a page that folks care about, so that way it can get it surfacing. And you're not liking it just for yourself. Sometimes you're also liking it so that other people that are a part of that follow you and your algorithm can also get notifications or at least see some of our content, because sometimes the message isn't for you, the message is for who you know or who knows you. So like I said, I got a dope episode that's coming to you this evening. I want to bring up a gentleman that I've known for quite some time. And we're going to talk really about some important things. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage my guy, my bro, Ade Jackson. What's going on, brother?
What's up, family? Great to be here with you. Finally getting to be on a show and talk with you about such an important topic for 2025 in this moment. How's
Yes,
your
sir.
evening going?
Yes, sir, man. The evening is going good, man. So you have definitely been on like in the comments, for many of the different shows. So I want to say first and foremost, I appreciate your support, your continuous support. I know I did talk about this in one of the other episodes, but it was dope to see you on the bigger picture podcast. But that's DJ Head, Elliot Wilson, and Jeremy Hecht podcast that resurfaced starting about a little over a year ago. Maybe a year and a half ago at this point. But what did it feel like, man, being able to see yourself on a national show like that?
Bro, I was just on my phone on Instagram. You see one of the DJs you follow kind of goes live. I didn't know like it was gonna actually get into the episode until I saw you talk about it. I was like, there's no way they're gonna put this up. But it was good to get to go up there to like talk a little hip hop, but then to also be able to speak about my brother Jay Burton, who were pushing for his freedom here in California as well, in Southern California. Wrongfully convicted political prisoner of 36 years. He unfortunately was charged by someone involved with the LA sheriff gangs down here in LA, and he's been sitting, in prison since he was 16 years old, man. And it's just crazy. Someone can be sentenced to 25 to life, and he's now served 36 plus years. So it was great to be able to talk music, but I did feel that I wanted to platform my brother, really my big homies, really whole freedom struggle, because really it is our duty to fight for freedom, as Mama Asada Shakur talked about. So as much as it was cool to like get up there, I did realize in the moment, there, like, he's behind a wall, like he's locked in prison. He can't talk about the injustice that he's going through. So being someone that supports his freedom struggle in that moment, it was very spontaneous, but I really appreciated that it resonated with you and that you remembered to say something about it. Cause I was like, there's no way they're putting this out to the public.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I definitely, of course, man. I'm always show love whenever I see my people. So, it's dope. But let's get into it. Today's topic is Black liberation in 2025, and I do appreciate you bringing up, your the freedom fighter Jay Burton and things like that, and what he's going through. I definitely heard you talk about the case and the struggle on the bigger picture podcast, and so the bigger picture show. And so but let's talk about Black liberation in 2025 though, right? Because I think that, obviously there was the civil rights movement, and there was what our people experienced, right? There was a need for that particular movement, but I think that liberation has happened long before the civil rights movement. The liberation struggle for Black liberation specifically has essentially happened since the time that we were colonized in Africa, right? And
Right.
so we see ourselves still fighting this long fight, even today, but the look of it is very different. And I feel like the look of it has changed, right, over the years. I mean, obviously, liberation was, Black liberation looked like folks trying to escape from, being enslaved, and then folks literally trying to, from that point, then we had folks trying to escape, from lynchings, and then we had folks trying to push for voting rights, and then we for Black people, and then also having folks push for voting rights for women, and then push again for equality in regards to the whole separate but not equal thing, and equalities in schools and funding and things like that. And so, what, based on your experience, which might I add that, Ade, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your resume and going to law school and things like that, so people can kind of be aware of what your experience is. But what do you think the Black liberation looks like in 2025?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's often, as I've heard other revolutionaries and freedom fighters talk about, they say BLM stands for the Black Liberation Movement,
Mm,
not just Black Lives Matter, right? And understanding that it's a historical continuum. And I think you did a great job of laying out some of those big tentpole moments in that continuum, of this resistance to oppression and resistance to subjugation that has linked people largely of the African diaspora, right? So just to ground it in what Blackness is, in a sense, is that a person of the African diaspora that's specifically resisting oppression, right? And resisting things like imperialism, colonialism. And that's been a continuum that, I don't like really putting dates on things, but like even before 1619, let's say. And the phases that they've gone through have been interesting. So seeing that we can understand that the movements that affect our lives and affect culture don't have to be just stamped on a website or a 501c3, right? Some of those things didn't exist when the most impactful movements around the world have occurred in many different countries, including the United States. So understanding that the Black liberation movement, although we might not have seen them within office, right? We might not have seen them in our history books. It has existed, right? Great organizations like the Black Panther Party, great organizations like the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. There's organizations, even specifically talking about the Nation of Islam as well. There have been organizations that have championed this idea of Black liberation that has a direct through line all the way from resistance of subjugation, slavery, and worse at the hands of many different peoples throughout history. And seeing that understanding that Black Lives Matter does have a link to that as well, just to contextualize things all the way to the present moment and things that are going on. But understanding that's not the only expression of Black liberation as well. So I think it's a timely question. Here in Los Angeles, right? When I was thinking of like what was Black liberation, what does that kind of mean? Um, I had to think of like one what blackness was to me in terms of just I think of it right for the start of this discussion. I think for an inclusive definition of people that are descended from the diaspora of Africa is important, but also understanding that liberation doesn't just come from legal rights or come from large marches and whatnot. Yet some of that grassroots work that impacts lives, that changes the real changes the substantive reality of our people still matter, right? And some of the things that I see doing that here, I'm in Los Angeles currently. I'm an attorney here in Los Angeles, work for the Inner City Law Center, providing eviction defense as we try to end and prevent homelessness in LA County. That's been a way for me to support my people using my skills and gifts. But there's been other phases of people doing that throughout history, as we've said, and to today. Some of the examples I would say, one of the places here in LA, I call it Africa Town. You know, it's a area where you really, I thought liberation was centered in freedom, right? I think it requires freedom, let's say, as a simple definition. And Nina Simone defined freedom as no fear. So where could people of the diaspora live with no fear? And here in Los Angeles, that's specifically in Africa Town, as I call it, otherwise known as Lamert Park. It's an area that was once restricted by racial covenants to not allow Black people or brown people actually to live there, but now has a thriving marketplace that functions multiple days a week, allows for a cultural hub of both music, art, and dance, and as well is a gathering spot for the community that also birthed Black Lives Matter LA, which was the first organization of the Black Lives Matter movement when it more formalized in 2013 in the wake of Trayvon Martin's assassination. That's one place that spoke to me as well about Black liberation, is a place where you can be Black without fear. You can talk to your brother, talk to your sister, talk to people. You can experience all the levels that Blackness can be. And it also reminded me of somewhere in Sacramento. I just have to give a big shout out to Community Movement Builders Neighborhood Program. They do really great work out of the Afina Shakur Center there in Oak Park. You know, they run 12 plus programs for the community. Shout out to my brother Jordan out there, Rain, Mel, the whole team, Isaiah, as well as their school that they run, the Malcolm X Academy. You know, I was thinking of just liberated ground. You know, when I come back to Sacramento, I go donate some time, pack some boxes of food for the community, doing just a little bit that I can to give back in a centralized way. And just seeing the love that they show, right, is a way that I feel liberation, a way that I feel like I can give more than just what society expects me to. And that's been powerful for me as well. But also just thinking of Black liberation back to some of the history, you know, today is the 59th anniversary of when the Black Panther Party was founded, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
happy Black Panther History Day, you know, and I gotta say shout out to all, you know, the Panthers out there and the ancestors as well that really put in that work and really set an example for how to affect our people and continue to be accessible as well. And also remembering the righteous legacy of Mama Assata Shakur the Great, someone that didn't respond to the traditional American life by accepting charges, but sought her own freedom, like many of those Maroons, many of those freedom fighters that we know, like Mama Harriet Tubman, and resurfaced in Cuba to live her life in such a radical way and continue to grow. So I would definitely encourage anyone watching this show to go check out the documentary Eyes of the Rainbow, documenting her time in Cuba. I think it's very impactful for this time as well. Rest in power to Mama Assata Shakur the Great, somebody who taught me much about Black liberation and how we have to be weapons of mass construction, weapons of mass love. And that's changed my life and how I've tried to approach the work that I do every day, both as an attorney, a community organizer, as well as a revolutionary artist.
I appreciate that. I think you definitely hit a lot of key things that I think we'll touch on just throughout this conversation as well. One of the things that I kind of see right now is there is a fear in Black people today that is very different from the fear that existed. Let's just, I'm going to, kind of ping pong back and forth between the civil rights movement, just because I think that's the closest, biggest, massive movement for Black liberation. The most recent, right?
Yeah.
Biggest, that's where you have the Nation of Islam starts to expand. That's where you have obviously the Black Panthers. That's where you have the was it the Panther 14? I think that was in New York. That
Panther
was
21.
Panther 21. I'm sorry, I said 14, 21. That with Miss Angela Davis and all them. So there's so many different. But I'm going to use the civil rights just because there's so many different reference points there. But I think that there's a different look in what Black liberation is. Right back then, we feared, of course, still feared lynching. We feared, going, what the consequences were for going to white schools or going to white only spaces. And so we feared what the political ramifications of that would be, what the social ramifications of that will be, but also what the financial ramifications of that will be, right? Like, you can go to get arrested. And I think that's ultimately how government used what government used the injustice system to kind of funnel out, or at least to deplete the resources, the financial resources of the Black Panther Party. But now I think there's a different kind of fear, right? I think nowadays the fear is whether or not I'm going to go along with the current structure. And as Black people, if I speak out, then I'll be ostracized in a way that would cost me my financial, right? My financial support, my financial constituents, right? Like the people that are kind of supporting me, or even reaching out to me or connecting with me. Like, if I work for a company, Fortune 500 company, if I speak out against racism or things like that, or try to make an impact, I could lose my job. And that's, if I'm a CEO, I make $250,000 a year. Right. How do I go from $250,000 a year to nothing simply because I want to speak out for other people? So what's your take on, like, the current fear that Black people have right now in regards to joining this kind of liberation?
Yeah, you know, survival pending revolution is something that the Black Panthers talked about, and it's a real thing. Capitalism makes an enemy of us all, I think, and tries to make your own liberation inconvenient and seem impossible, right? Even with those type of careers, what we're talking about is the golden handcuffs, right? If your lifestyle, you're making 200 something thousand, but you're spending, 180, 200,000 of it a year, like that does make it more stressful when you're trying to um, say something that say something of consequence. Let's just say that to something that might have repercussions even, and that's something realistic to know of. Every action has an equal but opposite reaction. So kind of, I think expecting that isn't irrational. I think it's reasonable at times.
Right.
Um, but I think there reaches a point where we all have a role to play. I was reading the political autobiography of H. Rap Brown, another political prisoner, Imam Jamil al-Amin, free H. Rap Brown as well, and he talks about how you don't have to be throwing Molotov cocktails to be a part of the movement. Like, everybody has the potential to be revolutionary. I often say the challenge for the contemporary revolutionary is, what are you going to bring to the movement? How are you going to maximize yourself for the movement? Like, what are those skills, experiences, and things you would otherwise bring to a 9 to 5 that you could bring to people in a user friendly, accessible way? But we're conditioned to think fighting for our own liberation is equivalent to death. Unfortunately, I'm learning more about the doctrine of Afro pessimism, But just looking back on the earlier writers of Mabel and Robert F. Williams, as well as George Jackson, the Dragon, as well, it's important to study and understand that those feelings that we feel are often because we're on a different form of plantation that they're trying to condition us to stay on, and not fight for our own liberation, even in those little ways, because they want us to believe that our liberation in 2025 has to equal picking up a gun and wearing a leather jacket and a tam like the Panthers, when that's actually not what it's about at all. It's really about how we relate to each other. It's about how we're battling to change each other's conditions and understanding we're willing to fight if that's what we're called to. But the primary goal of revolution and liberation is peace. As Mama Asada Shakur talked about in her poem Revolution is Love, that I would encourage everybody to read. It really speaks to the many levels of where you can make yourself into a tool of liberation for your people rather than just a tacit observer to the system and the continued oppression that often seems to lead Black and brown people to be on the worst outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. I remember listening to a speech that Gloria Ladson Billings had talked about, and she mentioned how the civil rights movement only had about 12% of Black people that physically participated. Right. So I think oftentimes when we look at the civil rights movement, right, we think about these things, we see the images, right? We see the March on Washington, we see, the Black Panther Party, we see the Nation of Islam or Malcolm X, right? We see or Malcolm Shabazz, right? We see all these different images, right? And it makes us seem like, oh, everybody was down. And of course, we have the older generation, right? They're talking like, yeah, man, back in my day, we was doing this, but it was really the majority of people didn't participate. The majority of Black people didn't participate. And I think what we failed to have in today's society when comparison to civil rights movement is that right now we have documentation, right? So we have documentation of what the various opinions and perspectives was. But what we fail to do now is that we fail to actually compare that to documentation in the before, because they don't have that. They didn't have cell phones. People wasn't recording themselves. They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have so when we think of our generation now, right, we think of people like, oh man, y'all all selling out. Martin Luther King did not have a great approval rating. Like
Right.
Luther King, Malcolm X, there were Black people who vehemently opposed these individuals, right? And I think that a lot of people feel it's almost like that. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so it's like the
Okay.
in Star Wars, right? They say like they want you to feel like you're alone. They want you to feel hopeless, right? Like, and in the end of the latest Star Wars that happened, Star Wars Episode 10, or episode 9, I think it's episode 9, but anyway, they basically are like making you think that you're alone, and so that way you'll feel hopeless, and so you won't join together and fight back, because you never know who's actually out there, because everybody else is thinking that I'm alone I'm siloed, I'm the only one that wants to fight for this. But in reality, we are the majority of people, right, who want, equal rights, who wants to be treated fairly by police, who want to have it. And one of the things I really loved about the civil rights movement, or especially the Black Panther Party specifically, is their 10-point program, right? Like they talked about and I think this is one of the things people don't understand, right, is that one of the points that I thought was super huge was they said every Black person that's in prison needs to be retried by a jury of their
Sure.
peers,
Yeah, their peers.
because they
Yeah.
said that even if a Black person is a criminal, even if a Black person is guilty of what the criminal justice system says they're guilty of, it still does not excuse what if they got a harsh sentence. So for example, crack cocaine compared to powder cocaine was 100 times more the sentencing, right? So what I'm getting people to understand is that there were things that people were attacking back then that they had issues with, right? That other Black people had issues with, but all it took was 12% to really be able to change the narrative. And we think it's 20 million people in America, 12%, right? We're talking about less than 3 million people.
Yep.
right? So I feel like there's this different perspective, right, in how Black people are fearful of the ramifications, and like you said, understandably so. But what's your take on what I just kind of said? I know I just went on a little tangent there and spilled out a lot.
No, I think it's a correct analysis. You know, the it's like right separation plays into the favor of the oppressor for sure. I kind of often like as like a metaphor, like it's easier to like control a split hand than a closed fist.
Hmm.
like it, y- when I was reading, like there's these set of speeches by Malcolm X about how to defeat global white supremacy, and he speaks about how we have to like learn our history, and then we have to like have unity basically in the community, and that's also what Robert F. Williams talks about as well. But you see how in these moments there are so many narratives and other forces that are trying to keep us separated and I don't know, distracted on things so that we don't come together to address our conditions in a material way, it seems like. You know, it doesn't seem that um, people power is being out mobilized, right? It's not like there's more cops than there are people, but we're definitely out organized in terms of the levers of power to make the system change and to change the material conditions often, right? And I think in this moment, it's tough for people. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have bought into American individualism. Like I
Yes.
think we're
Yes.
raised in a country that makes you think that like individualism and exceptionalism are like real things, such that you devalue the investment in just communalism. These days, especially when you can do so much on your phone, um, and other forms of technology to almost unplug from reality, not even getting into like AI stuff now and all of that, but getting to see that people need to be invested in their community is something that has to be, I think, external to your just faith life and Christian involvement outside of, you know, where you live. I think it has to be a value that's practiced and something that people continue to invest in, whether they're getting paid from it or not. And I think the American culture right now is all about what's going to pay me, what's transactionally going to work for me, what or feed me some dopamine immediately, even. And some of this community work that I think is required for Black liberation and for Black people to be free. And often I'm saying I'm pushing for Black people to be free because that means everybody's going to get free, in my opinion. Seeing as how
That's not an
oppression
opinion.
has
That's a
worked in this
fact.
country.
Historically
Yeah.
speaking, every
Like,
time Black people have gotten something, everybody else in the community has gotten something even better.
exactly. And I think that's something that we all have to fight for. And we have to be sure that we're still putting into these spaces, not just trying to reform things to be a part of systems, but how do we make systems better and less harmful for the communities that we come from and that we should have allegiances to, right? It's tough for people to, I think, see their role within capitalism not just as a cog in a wheel, which is interesting, right? I think we've just like Kwame Ture spoke about how when you're on university campuses, an you have an authority to sorry you have a responsibility to your people because it often took bloodshed and effort for Black students to be able to enter a lot of these institutions, and you have to remember that, you know, it's not just because you're having good grades or you have all the extracurriculars, but because our people struggled and fought to get into these places that we've often been kept out of. And I don't think that people have just gone soft. I know some generations would probably say that. Um, but I think that people have somewhat somewhat lost the will to fight just because we haven't seen it. Like I don't have a lot of mentors and older individuals in the movement, oftentimes because of COINTELPRO and how they convicted people and disrupted their lives. But then too, like people, if you don't see people doing it, how do you know to replicate it? And then it's that fear thing you're talking about, you know, like like being on the plantation, right? Like when they caught slaves that ran away or that tried to defy master, like they brutalized them in front of all of the slaves to try to make them have that trauma. And I think that's a real thing, man. Like I don't know, I don't know really what to like call that, how that's still like transitioning, but I think it's not just from the civil rights movement. I think it's specifically from that Black Power era towards now, is that there hasn't been in anthropology, they often talk about the assumption of unilinear progress, and that's like that's a fallacy. Basically, is that things don't just continue to get better over time. That's just not how things work. But that's how a lot of things are sold. And unfortunately, we're seeing now with the current administration and the current Supreme Court and the current phase of Congress, like look how many of our rights and things that have made America a livable place for Black and brown people have been targeted, stripped away, and eroded over time. And that's why we can't just seek to reform or be a part of the system or continue to not organize and just mobilize for certain events, because we need to change the system so that we can live better lives and live more free lives, and really achieve that freedom that Nina Simone talked about of living without fear, right? Like that I think would go a long way. But it's been, I think, a generational thing to, it's not just the new generation saying, oh, go get the bag, it's not just the new generation, listening to rap music and all this stuff. Like this is a there's definitely been a culture war to discourage resistance from Black and brown people. And I think largely that is from our federal government and the oppressive class trying to continue the status quo. I think there's a lot of things we don't know about the media and these apps and things, whether that's, from the 70s when the CIA was paying people to post stories, in Project Mockingbird. You can look it up. But like I bet you a lot of these podcasts and a lot of these streamers and these people are being propped up by different three-letter organizations to continue to distract people and audiences from the actual work that's needed to be done in their communities to make them a more safe place. And instead, like simple narratives of like law and order are constantly shoved down our throats as police budgets continue to grow. Yet the effectiveness of police is continually worth challenging, even before these ICE raids and collaborations and whatnot. It's just really insane to see how much money goes often towards your local police, sheriff's department, instead of towards, like upstream causes that would prevent crime, such as after school opportunities, youth and mentorship programs, safe spaces for the youth,
Great
and
jobs.
those are the program. That's why I look up to programs like Community Movement Builders Neighborhood Program. Is they're smack dab in Oak Park, right there off Broadway and 32nd, in the community, providing a space for the people. Whether that's a grocery pickup, whether that's a school, whether that's their arts program. That to me speaks to Black liberation in the midst of the belly of the beast, as Robert F. Williams talked about, of this empire that we're really a part of here in America.
So let me ask you this, bro.
Yeah.
Because I know that you brought up a lot of things that are kind of happening in today's society, bro. Um, I'm opposed to thinking that any political office, any government officials are going to save us, right? Like I think that hasn't happened historically, and I don't see it happening anytime in the future. And so my frustration with many people who align or declare allegiance to any one particular party is that you're both just like they are wings on the same bird, different
Yep.
wings, right? And so oftentimes I get frustrated when speaking to even elders, right? Who I don't believe in calling anybody out individually, right? Because I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but if I was like, I'm just using examples, right? There are many people that I know and people that are nationally known and internationally known as media outlets, as Black reporters, Black news anchors, things like that, who align themselves very closely with the Democratic Party because they've been getting paid to do so. And some of them are just feel like the Democratic Party is the answer, the end all be all, whatever. But my frustration is that there are bad things that have been happening under both parties. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so when we look at Black liberation, I think oftentimes we're looking for our oppressor to save us from their oppression. You know what I'm saying? On us. And in reality, it's not going to be them that's going to save us. And those freedom has never been given, it's always been taken. And I think one of the issues I have with our people is that we sit around and beg, for crumbs, or we sit around and beg for food and are super praising somebody because they dropped off some crumbs because the other person didn't drop off any crumbs. So we should be thankful that we got these crumbs and then praise this person because of their crumbs. And we'll hopefully the next person will leave a bigger crumb for us as we go forward. And I don't think that's ever been a successful plan in hoping and wishing. What's your thoughts on that, bro?
So what you're talking about was like aptly addressed by brother George Jackson the Great. He talked about it like every time you participate in the political system, you basically lend legitimacy to it as well as take away your own really from the people's conditions in a certain kind of way. So I believe your analysis is correct. I've had to grow to that same type of perception that, yeah, it's really funny that you said they're two wings on the same bird. I recently said that to somebody else. Someone else said that to me, and I was like, "Yeah, that's really it. Like, they're not actually going to liberate us. That's not what either party is about, unfortunately. And we have to kind of do that honestly ourselves. I think in a communal way. Um, and politics, is unfortunately, I think, not just the way to achieve Black liberation, as I'm coming to understand it. It's often pushed as that. Um, but I agree with you in the sense that neither party, I think, is going to save Black people. Of course, it always seems to come down to harm reduction. And it's like, well, why can't we go from harm reduction to what's going to help us thrive? Who's actually going to help Black people change their material conditions? And unfortunately, I don't think we can look to politicians for that. I think we have to look to each other, like in our communities. I say that, I believe in revolutionary intercommunalism, right? Like taking care of each other's needs and trying to maximize what we can do for each other in a certain way, whether the government's involved or not. And I think that's a way to achieve Black liberation rather than going and just voting and going and just voting and going and just voting. I believe it was Audre Lorde said, right? You can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
Right.
Like I think we have to really be conscious of that in these spaces and in these moments where we're in, because yes, certain laws have changed and that's made society different, but that hasn't made the struggle for Black liberation any less intense, right? You mentioned it earlier, as well as technology and surveillance have made things more complicated than before. I would also say like the weaponization of the Justice Department as well, right? Like people facing RICOs now, right?
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
sure they would have loved to break a RICO out against MLK back in the day if it was on the books back then, but I don't think it was. And I think we have to be ever conscious and ever vigilant to protect, right, our leaders and protect the people in our communities that are trying to bring this aspect of communalism, of respect, of love and dignity to each other that our government does not, right? I think it's very powerful to understand the legacy of Chairman Fred Hampton, but also you have to recognize the Chairman Fred Hampton in your community today, right? And not just give them a slap on the back. You got to support that brother or sister or person working in your community, right? That's the person that you should dedicate some time to, that you should try to mentor and get in other rooms with other individuals, right? Like we have to, like, it's our duty to fight for freedom. It's our duty to win, right? We must love and support each other We have nothing to lose but our chains. And people forget that we're still fighting, we're still struggling, that this continuum for Black liberation does require us to stand up and not just to go along and try to live long, oppressed lives, right? Like when I think about Mama Asada, when I think about Baba Sekou Odinga, when I think about Matulu Shakur, when I think
Man,
about Mafeni Shakur, like when I think of Bunchy Carter, John Huggins, all these great individuals, even people that are still alive, including Erica
Jonathan
and
Jackson.
others. Like when I think of these individuals, they give me so much pride to be who I am every day and to be in the spaces that I am. But they empower me to go try to inspire the next brother, right? And Tupac Shakur as well. Just how we acknowledge, like, he might not change the world, but he'll spark the mind that'll change the world. Like that to me is a similar Panther ideology, that responsibility that we have both to each other, but future generations. And I don't think politicians have that, right? Like they just care about who's going to vote and who's going to keep them in their job. And I think that unfortunately, the wheels of power have become disconnected from people power in a way that hasn't been solved, right? Since all this kind of dark money and the PACs can basically donate however much money more than normal human beings, it's made it more difficult for large mobilizations, I think, to have the impact that would make the wheels of power and politicians act in ways that would support actual liberation rather than just reform. And that's what's needed for Black liberation, really is total social transformation, is a revolution in a sense. And unfortunately, yeah, that's not going to be achieved through the political structures as they exist right now. But that's something that someone I think has to be in a certain level of, let's say, political consciousness to understand. And you're pointing out how capitalism, as well as someone's own economic interest, can lead them to deny that reality altogether.
Yeah, I think I can already say this for anybody that's watching. There's going to be a part two and a part three of this because I just based on how the conversation is going right now, me and Ade, I feel like we could talk about this forever. But obviously, we've got a rapport. We understand each other. We've known each other for a while, and we know the work that each other have been doing in the
Yes.
community. But what I guess what I'm kind of struggling with, or at least what I see, right, in the community is that um the moment that you critique, not even criticize,
Yep.
critique anyone that is of the Democratic Party, you're considered anti-black or you're considered a supporter of the other, right? So like a MAGA supporter, right?
Mhm.
Or the moment that you critique a MAGA supporter, right, or MAGA or anything like that, then you're an enemy of the state, right? So like it kind of puts you in a position where it's like, do I just get along to right to sing along to get along, right? Like, do I just kind of participate even though I know that both of these are kind of pitting us against each other, right? And again, there's always been disagreement to some level or extent in the Black community. But what I see now is us utilizing the tools that were given or provided by government, right? We won't provide, because if you think about it, right, Meta owns Instagram, Meta owns Facebook. They were in hand to hand with the government, right? We think about what's his name? Elon owning X. He was with the government, right? If we got somebody that's about to buy TikTok who gonna be hand in hand with the government. So we're utilizing the government's tools to then attack each other. And again, it's wild how I'm literally seeing the same thing that happened during the civil rights movement, right? We saw political Black liberation leaders criticizing each other, utilizing the media, right? Utilizing newspapers, news articles, interviews. And this is even people that I admire the most in Malcolm X, right? Like Malcolm X was criticizing Martin Luther King for a moment, right? And they were kind of clashing at each other. And he criticized Dick Gregory and so many other people who were liberation people, right? Who were fighters for, but they all had different methods in which they felt like was appropriate. And eventually, right, they started to come together and understand each other a lot more, especially once, Malcolm went to Mecca. But I fear that right now it's so easy to just cancel, right? Or like just for an example, Stephen A. Smith recently had critiques for Senator Jasmine Crockett, right? And whether or not someone agrees or disagrees with his critique, that's perfectly fine. But what I saw online was so many people like criticizing him, right? Like talking and belittling him when it's like, this is a black man who is successful and who has elevated so many other people in media because of his position. He's given people like Ryan Clark, given people like Monica McNutt, given people like Kimberly Martin, giving people like, so many different people. Shannon Sharp, after he got kicked off from Fox, right, gave Shannon Sharp a platform, and so many others as well too. And all of a sudden, because he said something that we don't like, whether you agree or disagree, now all of a sudden it's, oh, he's terrible, he's this, he's a charlatan, and I saw the same thing, and I apologize again if I'm venting, but I saw the same thing happen with Ice Cube, right? When he was coming up with his plan with a contract with Black America, he went on Roland Martin's show. They talked bad about him. Social media ran him through the mud. He was like, all right, I want to meet with Donald Trump. And he's like, I want to meet with Joe Biden. Joe Biden refused to meet with him. He met with Donald Trump, and all of a sudden he's turning on black people, and how could you, and this isn't a place for you, and you're a charlatan, and all this type of stuff. And I get frustrated because I'm like, why are we attacking each other? You could literally attack a government employee who is white every single day of the year, and you would run out of days before you run out of people to attack. But we still choose to focus on each other. I don't know, man. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I would say I need to do more reading in terms of like political science, but just in terms of my understanding of colonialism, right? If a smaller population is trying to control a larger one, it behooves them to keep groups separated rather than coming together, right? So if you
Right.
can foster division and people continuing to fight each other rather than having to directly do it, that's, I believe, the impetus for neo-colonialism. Really, it's not direct colonialism of someone having a occupying army, but you have a population that does the work of the oppressive extractive class for the oppressive class without them having to do it themselves, right? So we can talk all day about how there's more black and brown people in the world, yet however it's difficult to find a conglomeration of political states that are all fighting, let's say, in a global black interest. And that cycles down from, right, that like meta, let's say that meta national level, all the way down. I think it's very powerful what's going on the continent of Africa with the association of ASEAN states, or the ASEAN states, being led by that combination. I believe it's Burkina Faso, Mali, and I can't remember the third. But yeah, seeing how it'd be hard to find, it seems like 3 local black organizations that would hold an event together. Like there's always some issue. George Jackson talked about how we have to settle our differences because fascism's already here.
Right.
And like he was writing this in 1971, right? Like telling us that we have to be on the lookout. Robert F. Williams talking about this unity. Malcolm X is talking about unity, right? But who's also listening to that? If we're not, like, the enemy, right? So they're devising all the different ways to keep us separated. whether that's, the internet, podcasts, TV, radio. Like, I don't think it's something that is intrinsic to people these days, but in terms of the capitalist, extractive, oppressive class maintaining their control on this level of wealth that they have at the top, they have to keep us both involved in the system. Um, they have to keep us both involved in the system, but also believing we can still get ahead, even if they're extracting from us. Right. That's so. I took anthropology in college, and one of the things they talked about is um, how neoliberalism requires accumulation by dispossession. Like, people have to believe in the system and going along that they're going to do better, even if it's actually they're getting less and less and less and less power as things go along. And that's, I think, a state that we're at. It's, I would, let's say, like, neoliberal capitalism. Some people say late stage capitalism, what have you, not to over, I don't have an economics degree, but just like my understanding of the world that it's in this moment. But we can't forget that, like, it's our duty to fight for freedom, right? That call is still true for Black people today. And regardless of whether you get a medical degree, regardless of whether you make this amount of money, it behooves us not to buy into American exceptionalism and individualism, right? Like, because you can still be stopped by the cops, you can still be killed by the sheriff, you can still be a knee put on your neck. Like, that stuff hasn't changed, regardless of whether you're in, like the Fab 40s in Sacramento, or you're in Minneapolis, or you're in Florida, like, or you're in New York City, or you're in Louisiana. Like, all these things are still battles to be fought and won for the people. So regardless of whether our academic and economic attainment reaches a level, the Panthers talked about it best, right? Like, point one, right? We want freedom. We want the ability to determine the destiny of our community, right? And power, as in the ability to define phenomena and make them act in a desired manner. And that's something that we're still trying to reach as well. And it's just like, people don't want to continue to struggle. People, I don't think, want to continue to fight. And people also, I don't think they also understand that resistance will improve the lives of all of us, even if it's in a small little part to begin with, like, a small spark starts a fire. Like, you know, these things we often miss in our communities. We miss being able to support that Fred Hampton. We miss being able to support that next Asada Shakur, that next Atheni Shakur. We oftentimes put these people into boxes, and we often don't dedicate the energy and passion that we could to nurture those seeds in our communities. And it's our responsibility now. That's why I look up to some of the work that's currently going on with the revived Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Shout out to Pablo X here in LA, as well as Chairman Paul out there in Philadelphia, just for some of the work that they're doing, just in the community, directly organizing, man, like, trying to give people that source of, the government's not going to save us, other people aren't going to save us. And even just to circle it back to Stephen A. Smith, like, it is great that he's done so much. It's tough, right? We don't really have good examples in our American culture about criticism and self-criticism. Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, who also got his PhD, he talks about how criticism and self-criticism is necessary for any vanguard organization to continue to work for the people. And unfortunately, yeah, Stephen A. Smith's having to deal with some of that for some of his comments, but he's done pretty well for himself. He can deal with it. I do think it's emblematic of where our culture is at, though. And you attack the man, not what he said. And unfortunately, I think some of this internet, let's call it internetness or whatever, has taken away that ability to have a healthy dialogue between people that disagree on things. And, some of that's clip farming too. Some of that's just like how things have, like, developed and how to spread information. But we as critical thinking adults can't fall into that. And that's why I appreciate spaces like this, shows like this, dialogues like this to be had, so that there is a source of alternative media that people can enjoy and engage with in a way to expand their minds. Constant elevation, constant expansion creates elevation. And I think that's important for our mindsets today.
And I think that a lot of our problem is our attention, right? Like, what are we giving our attention to? Because what I will say is, a lot of times the subjects that even I talk about on this podcast, right? I've talked about everything from voting, black men voting numbers. I've talked about what's happening in Gaza with Palestine. I've talked about athletes, sports. I've talked about relationships. I've talked about all types of stuff, right? Just I'm like, what do we need to talk about? What do we want to talk about? Like, whatever I'm feeling. I've talked about artists, and it's interesting because oftentimes our attention isn't focused on the things we need to, like Black liberation in 2025, because it's so focused on the things that we don't care about or don't really need, and not need, but it's not as important for the long haul. Like, we'd rather talk about relationships. We'd rather talk about, you know what I mean, how much money should you have in your bank account, or how
100 men versus one gorilla.
you know what I'm saying? Like, exactly, 100 men versus a
The
gorilla.
CIA was just sitting back with
You know
that
what
one.
I'm
Like,
saying? Or we care more about, about Cardi B's pregnant than we do, you know what I mean, about Black liberation, right? And I get it, because everybody has their vices, right? Like, even Malcolm X was going to boxing matches. Now granted, it was to support Muhammad Ali, his friend, but even he was going to go, indulge, right? And so I understand that. Even Huey P. Newton smoked. You know what I'm saying? Like,
sheesh.
you know what I mean? So I get it. But I think that our issue, right, is that the distraction is 24/7. The distraction is everywhere. Whereas Malcolm X had to set everything down, leave his family to go to the boxing match for a couple of hours and support his friend, and then he would come back home and go back to work, right? Or maybe Huey P. or Fred Hampton, right? They would go outside to take a smoke, right? And then they would come back in and get back to work. Whereas today, people don't go outside, they don't put it down, they stay with it. And it's been flipped. Now they put it down for a quick moment to be a revolutionary online, to, you know what I mean, to do a protest one day for 10 minutes, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
To when it's safe, right? Like, when they know they're not going to have any issues or not get hurt, and then they pick up the phone and come back, right, to the distraction. So I think we're in an interesting time now where there's so much trying to stop us, which is crazy, because the way that I see it is, if there's so much trying to distract us and push back, it means that there's so much at risk if we were to come together. And I think that right now we have a responsibility as people who are for our people, right? And that's what liberation really is. You're for the people. And I remember Mark Lamont Hill was saying that a freedom fighter's never, his journey's never over, or their journey. I don't want to say his, because it could be women freedom fighters as well too. Their journey never ends. There's always something else that they can fight for, right? And I think that right now we're losing the will and the passion to want to fight. Now it's like, I'll get to it when I get to it. Let me finish this You know, let me finish this new Cardi B album. Let me finish this. Oh, Tory Lanez just dropped an album. Let me listen to that real quick. Tory got stabbed 14 times. Oh my God. Let's listen to that. Which again, I don't agree with anybody getting harmed or anything like that. But oh, let me look at the Meg Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez case really quickly. Let me know all the details about Puff Daddy, P
Yeah,
Diddy.
the Diddy case. I was just like,
Right.
bro, I don't have time for this.
Let me get all the facts about the Diddy case or the R. Kelly case and all these things, or the Jonathan Majors. Like, let me get all of this information about those things. But when it comes to like actually trying to free our people, oh, that's for somebody else.
Yeah, bro. Like one, another quote by Huey Newton. He said, the spirit of the people is greater than man's technology, right? So people power can overturn the system, can overturn what's oppressing the larger number of Americans and the globe, actually, world citizens. But if we don't come together, then the small oppressive class that's able to exploit everybody and make the current levels of economics work for them, they're able to continue to be in power even though they're in smaller and smaller number. And I do think there's been a certain level of kind of like spiritual violence to tell us not to resist, to tell us just to integrate and reform. Um, and we have to be conscious of, like the saying, being like with the world but not of the world, like knowing that like we're a part of America, but we have a responsibility of our people. I'm going to keep saying, it's our duty to fight for freedom. Like it's our duty to win, right? Like not just to go along with a system that continues to marginalize the majority of our brothers and sisters. Like as a friend of mine currently said, like we can't just get comfortable within capitalism, right? Like that's going to make us into tools of our own oppression, really. And that's not what the time it is in 2025. Like there's still work to be done. My grandfather had a saying, the work is either done or not done. And to put another spin on that, like the work for the people is either done or not done. And I think we all can see in this current moment, both with the current administration, but the states of our communities locally, that there's more work to be done. As we're the adults in these communities, we're the ones that people are looking to, not just for inspiration, but yeah, for an example of how to continue to build. And we have a responsibility, not just to this generation, but people talk about for like 7 generations, to try to build something and build a different world. And I think that's important to think about the Sankofa principle, right? Like we had to reach back as we climb, and understanding like the past to build a better present, while looking to the future. Like it's very powerful, I think, to think in these dynamic ways so that we don't get comfortable within our oppression. I had another quote too, which was kind of crazy, just like what we're talking about. It's like, and this is from the autobiography of Asada Shakur. She said, people get used to anything. The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave. That's from her autobiography. And I would definitely recommend people pick that up, give it a
Yeah.
read. It's a powerful, powerful, powerful written word that I think I wish I read sooner in my revolutionary development, to understand the state of things. But yeah, the American system as it is try to get you conditioned to accept your own oppression without even knowing it. I would call it like soft warfare. There's so much constant soft warfare on our phones, on different forms of media, that like a lot of people, don't know much about the Black Panther Party, don't know much about the provisional government for the Republic of New Africa, like don't know as much about the MOVE organization and the MOVE bombing. Like a lot of people don't really understand. I know we were talking a lot about the civil rights movement, but how that transitioned into the Black Power movement, and how the repression to those movements really affected the culture that's developed since. And George Jackson says that repression breeds resistance, but also there's a time like what do we do when the revolution doesn't come? Like what do we do when it looks like our enemies are winning? And unfortunately, we're at a point where I think a lot of people, you know, unfortunately kind of stopped fighting for our people's freedom and tried to instead fight for comfortable places within capitalism. And that's been very unfortunate to see because we do have a choice. Like we do have a choice. We do have certain forms of power, but it's often that people don't maximize them or instead choose to be safe, to find those safe spaces within capitalism rather than trying to change the system, right? Like Malcolm X talked about how revolution is about land and overturning the system, right? Kwame Ture talked about how mobilization, gets people to come out for issues, right? When's the next protest? But we really need organizations that are trying to overturn systems, right? Who's trying to break down mass incarceration, who's trying to free political prisoners, who's trying to change policing so the use of force, right? Who's trying to get officers that commit major misconduct not able to jump from department to department. We don't recognize the organizations often that do that and instead fall into the narrative of, oh, BLM bought a $6 million house. And it's just like, wait, are we supposed to just get killed in our driveways like Medgar Evers? Are we supposed to just get arrested on the street, for everything and not have our own like ability to safely do things? But then at the same time, learning from the past because you have to be in constant connection with the people so that they're not able to turn their back on the programs and work that you're doing. And I think the Black Panthers did an excellent job of that to a certain degree. And I think there's a level of criticism where, unfortunately, that changed. And I think a lot of misconceptions entered into our community about the work that they did and have done. But there's also been a coordinated effort to erase the work and the impact that they did. In Sacramento, they destroyed the Panther office that used to be there. In LA, they destroyed the Panther office here that was the subject of a 5-hour shootout with the police, which all Panthers got exonerated from by Johnny Cochran, rest in peace. There's an effort for us not to know our own history and not to know our own resistance history, especially. And I think that's something that we have to continue to memorialize and talk about because Black liberation will come from not only knowing our history, but improving upon our history. And that's something that we often don't reckon with. I don't know if it's because just, the scarcity of things. I think there's a heightened movement towards anti-intellectualism. So knowing how to struggle in a righteous way becomes more complicated than, just wearing a leather jacket and showing up to things. And I think it's tough to exemplify um, things you haven't seen, things you haven't like there's a gap, I think, often between our generation and the Black Panthers, right? Like I was born in the 90s, even, the original Black Panther Party ended in 1982. So a lot of people didn't experience the, I think, greatest and most impactful work of the party, yet their legacy still inspires them. So I encourage everybody who sees this and who understands the work that the Black Panthers did to get involved with their community, join an organization that's fighting for your people's freedom and that's trying to change the material conditions around you, because that's how Black liberation will be won, not just by fighting or bloodshed. I don't think that's where revolution is currently going to be fought in 2025. And like that revolution and total social transformation, I think will largely lead to Black liberation in a realistic way.
And I think you said a lot that is super key. And I hope that, the audience who's watching or listening, I hope you take a moment to take that in, to soak that in, and to really um, allow yourself to recognize the time that we're in, right? The opportunity that you have. This has been a dope conversation. Ade, where can people I know that you have your Instagram handle there. Where can people reach out to you? What's the best way to get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you a little bit more, especially my folks that might be listening if they're from the Los Angeles or Southern California region, although Ade does come up to Northern California as well too. Where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I put my Instagram here. It's at Life is Complex, all one word. That or at Life is Complex TV. You can also email me at ajxfmp@gmail.com. That's an email for me. You can send me an email there. Definitely want to connect with folks. Definitely trying to build. It's really about all power to the people by any means necessary. And that's going to require all of us. So definitely want to unify and build with folks here. And I think that's important. And it's just really, I appreciate the time to get to connect with you, brother Damaris. This is great. It's just get to finally be a member of this show and this powerful platform that you've just intentionally curated. And it's really, really excellent. Really shout out to you. Shout out to, the Panthers on Black Panther History Day. And, shout out to Mama Asada Shakura. She's making her transition to join the ancestors, someone that's so righteously impacted us and continues to inspire us in this moment to achieve Black liberation by any means necessary, continuing to inspire us to relate to each other in a revolutionary way and continuing to challenge us, right, to be weapons of mass construction, weapons of mass love in our communities. So, it's great to be here this evening. Great to be a part of this powerful platform. And I definitely look forward to more conversations to come on this topic.
Yeah, we're bringing this back for sure. Like I'm gonna tell you this now. Like we're gonna, once I in the stream, you and I'll talk a lot more. But we're definitely this was dope. I think you was dropping a lot of gems, and I hope the people are able to look at it, and catch those gems. And we're gonna have a great conversation. I appreciate to everybody that was kind of tuning in. I know we had quite a few people coming in and out off of the Instagram live. My man Jason Greenidge was in the comments, definitely gave some waving. And I saw my girl Tony, Queens of Production, was in the building too, stopped in for a minute as well too. So shouts out to Soror Tony, appreciate you always. And so just everybody that's joining, I appreciate you, whether you're watching a recorded version or if you're on the YouTube live. Please make sure you go to the Wise Word Wednesdays YouTube channel, subscribe so that way you can get the notification whenever we're going live. You can leave comments so that way we can post the comments as well too when you do. I would genuinely appreciate it. Hit that like button, get those likes up per usual. But our day is coming back, so this is not going to be the last time we have this kind of conversation, because there's a lot more that I want to unpack. I want to talk about, and I know I talked a little bit briefly about the whole relationship situation. I want to talk about this friction that we have between Black men and Black women publicly. So we could talk about that and how that impacts the liberation movement and how Black men and Black women in the past were able to overcome together. So we'll talk about a lot of this stuff, because this was dope, man. But thank you again, Ade, for joining the channel, man. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm gonna leave y'all like I normally do, man. We fresh, and I love y'all. Y'all be smooth.